Hello, I am back for another economics video. So today we will be solving this very difficult question from chapter 3 from a short course in Intermediate Microeconomics with Calculus. The chapter is called Budget Constraints and Utility Maximization. So here, without further ado, let's get started with this question. So here's the problem, okay? We've got our guy Brendan here, and he has $30 to spend for the weekend. And he wants to go out with his cronies. So he has this $30 to spend. He can spend it on two items. He can spend it on Wiley cigars, which are $1 each, and he can also spend it on Xavier whiskey, which is $4 a shot. And there are three different places he can go to. He can go to Whitton, which has a $2 tax on each shot of whiskey. He can also go to Sixtown, which has a $1 tax on each cigar. And he can go to Fixington. Now, Fixington has this peculiar way of taxing vices. So Fixington doesn't tax the consumer, but Fixington charges property taxes on everybody who sells vices. So in order to pay for those property taxes, all the pubs have a $10 entrance fee in Fixington. So the question is, where should our boy Brendan go for the best day with his cronies? And how much does that city's tax that he chooses hurt Brendan's enjoyment by not making him get as many whiskeys and cigars as he wants? So that is going to be the question, and the way we're going to solve this is we're going to look at his utility function. This is basically a function that shows how happy Brendan will be given the number of whiskeys he gets to drink and the number of cigars he gets to smoke. Plug those numbers into this equation and you'll get how happy Brendan will be. To spend his weekend, he can choose three different locations to meet up with his cronies. And yes, you see blah blah blah. And let's start by answering the first part of this question. Which city would Brendan choose for his weekly shopping? So to answer that question, we first need to do the optimization. So here, to do the optimization, we do this thing called the Lagrangian. Now, if you did not do Calculus 3 yet, this class is probably not going to be for you, since this is, generally speaking, take this class after you take Calculus 3. But for viewers who know what Calculus 3, this should be fairly familiar. So you have this Lagrangian here. You have our thing we want to maximize, which is Brendan's utility. We want him to be happy. And we also have inside here our constraint, which is basically he only has $30 to spend. So the amount of money he has, which is M, minus what he spends, which is this expression here, has to equal to 0. And then we take the partial derivatives with respect to the number of whiskey shots he buys, the number of cigars he buys, and also the lambda, which is in front of the constraint. And then we solve for the partial derivative of all three of these equaling to 0. And then there's a lot of substitution, and then eventually after you do all the hard work, it all boils down to you get this formula here for x and this formula here for y. Now, the reason why I use variables is because the second part of the question is going to ask you to change around a few of the constants. So it's a lot easier to do once you have these expressions already solved for x and y. So here is the equation for... So what we're going to do now is we're going to plug our numbers in. And then we're going to find, which I can show you down here, that the optimal solution in the case of Winton gives Brendan the most happiness. So yes, Brendan, enjoy a day with your cronies in Winton. That's probably going to be the best for you. You get 57.04 square units of happiness. Now, the reason why I put square units here is because For people who do not understand this utility function yet, this utility function is basically a product of two sides. You can think about it as a rectangle where one side's 1 plus x, the other side is 1 plus y. And we want to maximize that area of that rectangle. So that's where I get the unit squared. But I also put utils for people who are already familiar with economics. So Winton is, you get 57.04 happiness. So the optimal choice is for our friend Brendan to go to Winton. Now, when Brendan goes to Winton, the optimal combination of goods he should buy is he should drink 2.08 shots of whiskey and he should smoke 17.5 cigars. And the tax in this scenario, which we can find by just optimizing for a duty-free scenario, like if Brendan managed to get his family to buy him vices from duty-free at the airport, which we honestly want to not let that happen. We want Brendan to not have to worry about how his family, and also I spelled Brendan wrong here, so let me fix that. But yeah, so that is the welfare burden. You just subtract the duty-free utility, you take away from the duty-free utility the amount of utility he gets with the optimal city, their taxes. And then we find that the taxes in the least possible taxes in the least damaging city is costing our boy Brendan 19.52 square units of happiness, aka utils. So that is the main part. Now, here is the visual proof and why this is the case and why this is optimal. If we go ahead and I did all of this stuff here. This is an online graphing calculator. I plugged everything in here, right? You get here parameters, right? We have, these are all 1, prices, whiskey's 4, and then we put in our whiskey tax, and we set our money to 30 because that's how much money Brendan has. You can see this here is the optimal solution. This point, this red line here is basically, we call this in economics, this is the possible, this is basically the budget constraint. So you can see he can spend all his money on whiskey and get 5 whiskeys, or he can spend all his money on cigars and get 30 in Winton. And then the blue line here is basically showing all the points on the curve that will get our boy Brendan exactly our number of utility. Oops, that should be 1. Exactly our number of utility, which in this case is here. We're finding the indifference curve for this 57.04. So this blue line shows all the combinations of whiskey shots and cigars that give him 57.04 units of happiness. And you can see that this point on the budget constraint line is the highest indifference curve, aka the indifference curve that's the furthest out from the origin, aka the 0 point. So any move along this line will end up going to an indifference curve that's closer to the origin, meaning less utility. That's why this is the optimal solution. This is perfectly tangent, as you can see here. And I also made a green line here showing even more evidence. This green line basically shows, assuming that he buys the X shots of whiskey and spends the rest of his money on cigars, how much utility does he get? And you can see that value peaks when he buys 2.08 whiskeys and spends the rest on cigars. So this is the optimal solution, and that's how you can prove it through economic theory. Now the next, and the equations for the difference curves are all here if you want to look at it. You just basically set utility constant and then solve for either x or y in the utility function, with utility xy being constant u. And that's how you get the indifference curves and prove your answer is correct. Now the next thing is the bonus part. So the bonus part, as you can see, is here. So now the utility function, the constants are changing. So this 1 here changes from a 2 because Brendan has learned that moderate alcohol consumption is healthy. So he wants to drink a little more alcohol. So instead of this being, when this is a fat foil, this is going to be 2x instead of 1x. So it benefits moderate alcohol consumption. But I did not change the XY term because it's not heavy alcohol consumption I was looking for. Now also, Brendan, he's also going to lower his spending on whiskey and cigars to $25 for these same health reasons. So given these two new changes, what city does Brendan go to now, and what is the new welfare loss due to tax in this case? So if you go ahead and substitute all of that in, you get Winton is now, Brendan can still get 45.38 units squared of happiness, and Whitten is still the most optimal city for our boy to go to enjoy his cigars and whiskeys with his cronies. And now the welfare burden has dropped to 14.68 units squared. The reason why is because he's buying less whiskey and buying less cigars. So congratulations, Brendan. You found a way to have a great day out with your cronies without breaking the bank and with less impact on your long-term health. So that just about does it for our answer to the question. And have a nice day with your cronies, Brendan.